Today I'm going to talk about, let's say, last part of my PhD and what I'm working right now. And the good things about what I'm studying, at least when I do the presentation, is that I work mostly with recommender system and online platforms. And I assume more or less that everyone I've used at least once in some of her life a streaming service. So I don't have to explain too much about it. But at least what we know is that it's a technology that in the last 10 years definitely changed how we listen to music in good and bad ways, let's say. And today I'm going to talk mostly about bad ways, let's say, but definitely something that we have to take into account. That from a rhetoric perspective, it's kind of interesting to understand how a recommender system that everyone have personalized playlists and radios, whatever we see on the screen when we interact with streaming services, they have a kind of influence in some ways or another. I will not talk too much about recommender systems in terms of technical terms, because it's not the main focus. This is probably the most technical slide of the talk, just to give more or less some idea. In recommender system literature, there are two sets of let's say, players. There are the users and items, as they call the user, the listener, this music, different plays, different goals, in different contexts, and then the items, which is a bad way of calling music, but in recommender systems, items are music, so the artist, and we can use the signal for processing some information and recommending this and that. There are some metadata that we can use, data to release, and so on. So out of information, and basically when the system works, studying the interaction between this set of things. But what I find mostly more interesting is this slide that is not about recommender system, but it's definitely saying a lot related to it. It's actually from 96, the figure from 1967, I think, from this work on the theology of music by Nattier, done to Molino. And what they did at the time, so for streaming services, everything, was try to understand and to characterize what is music meaning. And I find it interesting because when I talk about recommender system, I see somehow that if we see on the left, there is the qualitative domain, so the things about the creators, the authors, the historical situations when the music was composed, and so on. And this is part of what gives music meaning. And on the other side, there is the static domain, so say the listener or the side, the recommender. And I find it interesting because sometimes we forgot that music, it's the meaning of music is something in between, or better, it's given by both sides. And especially recommender system is something that is really important because on one side we have information about the music itself, on the other side we have a lot of information about listeners, and we try to mix both to give sense to what we see. Now, this is true, I mean, this was true since much before streaming services, at least I think that when they did this terminology of music was around the radio period, but today we are going to focus on streaming services because it's one of the tools that is most used. And before, let's say after this introduction, I mean, this is the last slide about of this introduction, and I like it because it's from a web radio, and he has a slide, which I used a lot. And I find it interesting because they create this kind of dichotomy. And what they support is the fact that they use music selected by people, not algorithms. But on the other side, I don't think that there should be a dichotomy. So somehow algorithms and people can work together. So I think that also not important. It's important, let's say, think just that bad things that algorithms can do, but also use it in a way that can be useful and can help people engage and enjoy music. Now, about the project itself, this is just some institutional thing. It's a Marie fellowship, 2 years fellowship. I'm working in the Sapienza, and I will also collaborate with the European Commission. As part of the project, the goal would be actually to inform policymakers in some way about the current state of the music recommender system and streaming platform ecosystem right now. And I arrived to work on this from a kind of interdisciplinary path because I started working, studying mathematics and right here for the sound and music computing master. Was the first time that I heard about MIR, because at least at mathematics they don't tell you about MIR, but in general it's not a thing that you know that exists at some point. And then thanks to them to the master, I arrived at SoundCloud, where I did a short internship on audio fingerprinting related stuff that helped me arrive on BIMA. And also it's part of this cadre that support job today, where I spent a couple of years there working as an engineer, and was really interesting to see also and understanding how the music industry works at some level. After that, I started on the PhD, and also to stress that I did my PhD mostly at the music technology group, but also collaborated with another group that is the web science, the for computing group, the chapel, and was really a nice experience. And this I enjoy a lot doing the PhD. And after that, I arrived at the European Commission in this new center for algorithmic transparency, where somehow I stopped working on music and started working more general on the recommender system, the impact that they have in online platforms, not just music related. And now I'm back at the Sapienza, so kind of happy to, after 10 years of traveling and doing experience, so have been able to be back at my hometown. Okay, and also before to start, this is mostly for master students and whoever is interested in the topic, because I will not cover a lot of things, but definitely one thing that I learned in PhD is that it's important to read a lot for doing a good PhD. And this book is really nice. It's by Nancy Bailey, that is one of the pioneers of the field of internet studies. And she described how the technology related to music, social media, start to change the role of the artist itself and the relation with artists. Another nice book is this one, more for who's into a recommender system, that is computing based, by Nick Siever. He is an anthropologist, and he spent his PhD interviewing and studying the recommender system community, going for some streaming services, somehow trying to understand what was behind what they built. And lastly, this is quite new. It's from Liz Fanning from this year, and she's a journalist, and she spent a lot of years studying Spotify from this perspective. I find it very interesting because it's not just about how music is recommended, but also other logics behind how playlists are built, and all the things related to more music, so how people start to listen to music in the background, more than listening actively. And I think it's really interesting reading. And other two things, if you're more into academics, apart from promoting my PhD thesis, I did also the one by Andres, who did a PhD here at the UPF. It's a really nice work, and somehow I find our two theses kind of complementary, because Andres spent a lot of time working on artist perspective. I was most into the listener one, and you are into this topic and you want to see some scientific book here with. I think these are great places where to start. Now, this is what I will talk about today a bit. I will start with diversity. That has been the topic of my PhD, and still I don't know, or at least I have some doubts about what does it mean. Discoverability is what I'm working on now. I will just finish with saying a few things about algorithmic auditing, that it's a research area that started in the last years, and still it's not really defined by this, or at least there are different opinions around it, but definitely will have more, I think, importance in the near future. So for diversity, I will start with this video, because
diversity in where the music comes from, so like the origin, geographic origin, It's usually
there
first
are
important
subtitles,
that I listen to female artists. That's the first thing I would say.
Okay, sorry. Try again. Okay, let's try again.
That I listen.
Diversity in where the music comes from, so like the origin, geographic origin.
It's usually first important that I listen to female artists. That's the first thing I would say.
Be able to listen to styles of music which I haven't heard before, from parts of the world that I haven't heard before.
Well, in terms of diversity, I think I particularly focus on the lyrics of the song.
Different cultures and different countries, sometimes even under different political or religious influences.
I think about how different this song is from the mainstream tracks that you can hear in the radio.
Different sounds, and especially that the song can transmit something that I can also feel connected to.
Okay, so this video, I mean, just to explain, I did my PhD during the COVID break, so for 1.5 years, there was this thing of doing videos for all the papers, so submitted to conferences, and was a lot of effort sometimes, because we are not kind of video makers, but we started making, I was kind of lazy. So I thought, okay, let's take some 10 random people from the MTG, I think you recognize most of them, and just ask them, what do you think? What do you value when you listen to music? How do you connect with diversity? And I found it interesting because I really took 10 random people, and what they said was kind of 10 different things about the importance of diversity in their experience. And from that thing, I started realizing that probably diversity can mean a lot of different things. And what we did in one of the studies in the PhD was exactly to ask people, when you listen to music, how do you assess what is more diverse than another thing? What is your experience with the wider systems? So somehow to having an idea, some ground truth, with some basis for being able to design better recommendation. And we did this too. We did focus group interviews, focusing just on music. And we found pretty interesting aspect related to diversity. The thing is, depending on how much you know about a specific music, you might see and experience diversity, let's say, for the words. And for instance, this participant told us people who don't know much about a particular genre probably would agree on some things that are a bit more generic. So when you don't know something, everything sounds more or less similar because you don't have the experience, maybe you don't know so much about specific music that you are not able to recognize. Maybe there's more differences between different style of music. But if you're experts, and this has been proven also on different topics related to music, usually you know a lot about something and you have strong opinions. And that means that also what you think it's important in terms of diversity might be really specific and can be also, you might tend to disagree with other experts like you. And this was what another participant told us. So I don't feel like I can make a better decision on what is diverse, but then there is a kind of bias that comes based on the fact I like music. So this per point was, okay, if I have to recommend diverse music, I have to take into account how much you know about this music. The second thing that we observe is that sometimes diversity can be used also to deconstructing the stereotypical views. And in particular, this participant told us, okay, the music that I want to listen to and the life before the participating in the surveys was predominantly white male, which I deposit feel what is predominant in the industry to some extent. And in this regard, by showing to the participant of the study playlist with still electronic music by different artists from different places of the world, they start to realize that actually there is something more than what you usually know. And the same was for these other participants saying that, okay, I realized while I'm making the questionnaire that I had a very strict definition about the electronic music itself. And this is kind of related also to the idea of knowing more or less a specific music genre. And then this is the last part, probably the most interesting. We had also participants to tell us when you were listening to music, did you experience something like maybe there was something that you disliked before and then you started enjoying a little bit more. And in this case, this participant told us, okay, I never liked electronic music, but thanks to algorithms that present me different tracks, I found myself listening to it and noticing the differences between these. Then I started listening more often. So all these kind of insights were helpful for us. I will skip this one because they told us, okay, we can use recommendation for better purpose, for making people aware of things that they don't know much about music, about a specific music. And somehow we can, by tuning the diversity of the recommendation, we can help them discover new things. And using the insight from the previous study, we did this other study, which was a longitudinal study exposing people for 3 months to specific levels of diversity of music, still focusing on electronic music. And we noticed how effectively, by showing different aspects within the same music genre, so for instance, showing electronic music that is more experimental, one is more danceable, compared to showing just one specific kind of electronic music, we see how this recommendation will also be beneficial and help listeners somehow be more curious and also open to listen to music that they didn't like before too much. So this was like at the end of the PhD, and somehow I still am hopeful, and I was hopeful that okay, we can use recommendation for doing great things. But then when we look at, let's say, headlines of different things, research paper, but also, let's say general website describing things, there are clearly feeling that recommending the current state of recommendation is much, it's not so good in some case when you think about gender discrimination, when you question fairness and diversity. So there is still this idea that streaming music is bad, and at some level probably it is, and people are experiencing things that they don't like. So on one side we think, okay, recommender system can be good. On the other side, we feel the reality that it's not always so good, let's say. And this somehow led me to this segment to write another, the Marie proposal, this time focusing on this concept of discoverability, that it's quite a word that is not so used, at least for me was unknown until I start going a little bit more into the cultural policy, let's say, field. Because it's not, we talk a lot about discovery in music streaming services, but not about discoverability. To give you an idea, to give you a definition, discoverability from the design perspective is how easily user can find feature, information, or functionalities. So this is an example of low discoverability because it's a game that you have to find the character that doesn't fit. In this case, this one, and definitely. If this is not low discoverability, the game is boring. On the other side, Google is an example of high discoverability. So when you open Google or whatever search engine, you have to find search bar because it's the only thing that makes sense that is there and you have to use. So from the design perspective, this is a really good example of high discoverability. Now, at some point in the last 10 years, there has been around this idea of content discoverability that is kind of related to discoverability, but definitely it's not the same thing. And also, there are also different opinions about content discoverability itself. I use this definition because it's one of the first. I mean, there are others before, but at least it's one that works for the definition of today. And if definitely there is a field of study debating about this definition itself, but generally speaking, we can think about discoverability as the property of an item, its availability online, its ability to be found on a wide range of other content. And initially has been defined and used mostly in the audiovisual and movie sector. Now we see also used a lot of music, but it's definitely, at least in research paper, it's not something computer science research is not something that studies so much, but in other fields there is a lot of discussion about it. So for the purpose of today, we can consider discoverability in its simplest form as the revenue of an item to be found, even if there are much more subtle aspects around it. And if we think about music discoverability, we can think about the home page of a streaming service, your service, this is Spotify, and we can think how every item, playlist, artist in this home screen is there because of an algorithm. Can be how these feeds are ordered, can be how the artists inside are ordered and displayed, the fact that maybe the film that you have listened recently are here in the first row, your playlists are there. So there is an algorithmic component really important in how things are displayed and therefore how we can listen to some kind of music. And in the library, in this project, what we are trying to understand is exactly how things are shown and then how people interact and discover music are influenced by the algorithm that are behind the streaming services. Now, I will detour a bit from the music part and focus on algorithmic auditing. That is again another at least research area that is kind of new, but there is a lot of debate starting from the definition of what is an audit. It's a term that we heard from other fields like financial audit of this university. So if you have money from public funds, someone will check that you are spending this money in a perfect way. So somehow the compliance with the regulation, it's probably how we can think an audit in its most in its original form. Now with algorithmic auditing, there is some kind of mixed ideas also with more the research side. I will introduce one definition, but before that, I give an example about classical audit, one of the most famous. You want to build a face recognition mechanism, you do it, it's great. But then at some point, someone tried and start and understand that it is not working because maybe in this case because of the color of the skin or the gender. And in fact, when this researcher use a white mask, the algorithm start working with her face didn't work. And it is probably one of the most famous examples by Dr. Ramini and Jadru about how commercial face recognition system had worse performances according to in this case, they studied the gender and also the color of the skin. So they found that there is a gap. And according to some tools have more gap than others, but overall, what they found is that there are different in performance. There is also a nice documentary around it, about it, and again, this is definitely one of the most famous in the field. There are others, but this is one. So, audit. The definition, one that I use a lot, and it's probably, I like it because it's simple, but maybe there are others that also work. Audit is an empirical study investigating public algorithmic system for the potential problem. And there are three parts that are interesting here. The first one is empirical study. So, other kind of experiments that can be quantitative, qualitative, mixed method can work, but definitely it has to generate evidence-based claims with well-defined outcome metrics, of course. The idea of public algorithmic system also is important because on my PhD, I don't consider that we did audit of system because most of the systems that we built were also designed specifically for the experiment in laboratory. So they were not public. People weren't used the system we used in our study. But if you do allow it, the idea is that you are working with something that is out, that you are already using, and it's not a prototype, it's not a simulation, it's a real system. And then this is also quite a broad definition of what is a potential problematic behavior, but we can understand it in a way that a behavior is problematic when it causes harm. And harms also can be a lot of things. We can think about the impact on the mental health, we can think about information, we can think about the impact on rights. With music, it's kind of difficult because still to justify that there is a system that is doing, that has problematic behavior and cause harm, it's something that is hard to justify. And it's something that I'm really struggling a lot, because when you ask for funding for investigating problematic behavior, you have to show that this system is working. But everyone thinks that music is great and no one cares too much. So I think I use this slide mostly for students, but I think it's important to understand why it's important to do audits, because in doing the research, you have maybe your new theory about your system, you do a nice model neural network for it, you do some experiments, and then you have a paper accepted, and you're that's it. Now, in real life, or at least if you work in the industry, at least you have to do some testing, some user testing in general, and if everything goes well, you're happy, and the system actually is put in production. Now, when it's in production, you sometimes this idea of having testing system with an average users, but most of the time are several users. And also what is important to consider about the user itself is that it's not just face in front of a screen, but the user interacts with the system, they feedback, and therefore the idea that you use when you design the system in the moment that it's in the real world, and also be somehow, let's say that the practical application can be versatile from the reason why you design a system, can be a recommender, can be other system. Especially because several people interact with your systems and they also interact among themselves. So I think that when we do research, let's say in academia, most of the time we do our things and then we think about, okay, someone will use the system. We don't know much about it because it's also difficult sometimes to parallel test with user, especially at scale. How they do it, somehow it's the contrary. So most of the time, not all the audits, but several audits focus on what is outside the system itself and treat the algorithmic and the model and the architecture design part as a left. Now, it's not always true because there are some audits that focus also in the technical part, but definitely from an external point of view, it's kind of difficult to know what is happening inside a public system. So it's kind of different ways of seeing and studying the system itself. Now, I also use this a lot because it's a classic comic saying, there are some researchers saying that they struggle a lot with a problem for years. They have computer scientists saying, yeah, I'm here to solve it with algorithms, and then it seems that it doesn't work at the end. And this is, I use it a lot, mostly because I think that, especially in the algorithmic audit field, to think that another algorithm will help solving the problem of other algorithms is not always good. Clearly there are some techniques that are more computational for doing audit also at scale, but definitely the area of the audit is to study a phenomenon in a specific socio-cultural context, and therefore an algorithm will not save us from the problem that others pose. Now, okay, now I will finish in a few minutes. I'm quite happy today because when you start a new project, you spend like 5-6 months saying about things that you will do because you have done nothing. And now it's almost 1 year that I'm working on that, so I have a few results that I'm going to share with you. It's kind of the first time. And again, when you start a project, you do a nice literature review of the state of the art. And the first project that I worked on, there was this review about how much user involved recommended systems. The most interesting aspect is that a lot of people do audits in an algorithmic way. So somehow in the same way that the comics before were saying, just creating agents, so puppets, so automatic ways of simulating user behaviors in the system and trying to understand if problem emerged by simulating users, or also trading. It's a technique that is kind of used in a lot of fields, but definitely there are not so many audits that involve people and users in understanding what are the problems that they experience. And another thing that is worrying, at least for us, is that the audit of cultural, let's say, platforms are definitely not so much. I found, according to the definition that I use in the literature review, just one about Spotify and one about Netflix. And well, and definitely, I think that the problem that there are other fields can be considered more high risk than music and cultural sectors. And this is definitely reflected because there is a lot of study about misinformation and other kind of problems that are really important for our society. Hopefully, maybe in future we'll see also more about cultural and creative sectors. Well, and this is one example that I discovered while doing another study of my project, and it's about her, that is Sabrina Carpenter. I don't know, many of you know the song Espresso. For me, I mean, I didn't know her. I don't know, I mean, I know the name, but not the song. And I was doing some interviews, and people started telling me about, yeah, because at some point, I heard that this song was recommended again and again after every song. And then I started digging a lot and I discovered that it was actually a thing. So at some point during 2024, whatever you were listening at the end of the album or as an extract, but I don't know, always a lot of time, there was this song. And people started investigating. What I found also interesting is that they also start playing these conspiracy theories about people against Spotify. And the most interesting thing for me is that there was a kind of, let's call it, movement somehow of users start discussing about this thing online. And we can see here there are some tweets, so like this, that I don't know. Here, say it was this user was listening to hip hop, and at some point Espresso, or also the one on the top was listening to a podcast, and after the podcast, instead of the episode, the next episode, it appeared that Espresso was recommended. So this is a good example of one specific type of auditing. So an auditing that emerged from the listeners themselves in this case, because the idea that the people that use a system are the ones actually can detect in their daily experience if things are going wrong. It's one of the ideas of AI, all the projects that I'm doing. And what for me was interesting because I really didn't know about this while they're doing PhD in my studies. They helped me discover this, so I can use it like a nice example of auditing in the music field. And somehow, what the idea of what we want to show is that if there are other kind of phenomena like this, somehow we should be able to give users and listeners some tools for protecting and start trying to understand why these things happen, because you don't have access to Spotify. Now, okay, so what we, let's do this. During the interviews, what we noticed were that people tend to focus on three areas. One is the most famous, or say the one most investigated, enforcement of societal bias, can be about gender discrimination, can be about also race, ethnicity, so the fact that we tend to see a specific group of artists recommended to ourselves, also depending on who we are. And this is one kind of problematic behavior that people experience a lot. there are commercial imperatives that also, I mean, it's really the highly studied overriding bias, and something that is known since 20 years ago. I think one of the first papers was done here by Logano at that time, and for before streaming services, but still people think that things are recommended because there are some hidden promotional things. Also, there is a lot of right now cross-promotion between different platforms. So something that is really viral on TikTok that magically happened to be Spotify in the recommendation. So also the difference between different platforms is spillover effect, something that is interesting to study. And another one that I tend to use the word filter bubble because something that's really charged by different meanings and totally a lot debated, but yet people feel that they are confined out of time and it's always the same thing. The recommended system don't always help discover music. So well, just to conclude and maybe add some question and discussion. This is the methodology I believe, and I'm more or less here, so it's on the day, but the idea of all this process is okay. As a researcher, we tend to have some strong opinion about things that are wrong. Let's try to not start with this. Let's try to gather some evidence about what people think are not working for them, equal they discover music. And then based on that, let's use this knowledge for creating tools and let's see, something that can help people themselves in how it the platforms. And eventually inform the policymakers that these things work or may not. So this is more or less what I'm the idea of mine, I believe. And with this, I think is my last slide. I mean, there is this paper that basically is about the proposal. I mean, more or less summarize the proposal itself. You want to know more about it. With this, I am. So I will let people answer some questions.